The apartment was deceptively peaceful. Claire had moved in just a few days ago, hoping to start anew. The walls, though bare, held a promise of new beginnings. She had chosen this place for its tranquility, a stark contrast to the chaos she had left behind. Sunlight streamed through the windows, painting the empty walls with warmth. It was a rare moment of serenity, a brief respite from the overwhelming task of unpacking and settling in. The golden rays seemed to whisper promises of brighter days ahead. Claire unpacked boxes, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Each item she placed in its new spot felt like a small victory, a step towards making this space her own. Yet, with every box emptied, the reality of her solitude became more apparent. It was a fresh start, a chance to leave the past behind. The memories of her old life, filled with noise and confusion, seemed distant now. Here, she could redefine herself, find peace, and perhaps rediscover happiness. As dusk settled, the shadows in the room grew longer. The once warm and inviting space began to take on a different character. The dim light cast eerie shapes on the walls, and the silence grew more pronounced, almost tangible. The silence, once comforting, began to feel heavy. It was as if the apartment itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Claire couldn't shake the feeling that she was not entirely alone, that the walls had stories to tell. Claire prepared a simple meal, her mind wandering to the future. She thought about the new job she would start next week, the new people she would meet. The kitchen, though small and dimly lit, felt like a place where she could create new memories. The city lights twinkled outside her window, a stark contrast to the growing darkness within her apartment. They were a reminder of the vibrant life just beyond her walls, a life she was yet to become a part of. The lights seemed to beckon her, promising excitement and new experiences. She ate quickly, a strange unease settling in her stomach. The food, though simple, tasted different in this new setting. Every bite was a reminder of the changes she was undergoing, the new chapter she was writing in her life. Exhausted from the move, Claire retreated to her bedroom, seeking solace in the silence of her new home. The bed, though familiar, felt different here. As she lay down, she couldn't help but wonder what the future held for her in this new place. The silence, now a constant companion, seemed to whisper secrets of the past and promises of the future. The first whisper came as Claire drifted off to sleep. It was faint, barely audible, like the rustling of leaves outside her window. She opened her eyes, heart pounding, but dismissed it as the city sounds. She closed her eyes again, willing herself to relax. Just as sleep returned, another whisper, closer this time, sent chills down her spine. She sat up in bed, straining to hear. Silence. Had she imagined it? Doubt gnawed at her. The city was never truly quiet, but these whispers were different. They were intimate, insidious, slithering into her mind. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her exhaustion. Night after night, the whispers returned. They were like a haunting melody, a sinister lullaby that played in the background of her life. Claire would lie in bed, her heart pounding, as the whispers began their nightly ritual. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, filling the room with an eerie presence that made her skin crawl. They swirled around her, weaving in and out of her dreams. Each whisper was a thread in a tapestry of terror, binding her tighter with every passing night. She would toss and turn, trying to escape the voices that seemed to seep into her very soul. The shadows in her room danced menacingly, as if mocking her futile attempts to find peace. Each night they grew louder, more insistent, as if trying to break through a barrier. Claire would cover her ears, but the whispers would penetrate, relentless and unyielding. She could feel a presence, a shadowy figure that seemed to inch closer with every whisper. Her eyes, wide with fear, would dart around the room, searching for the source of the torment. Claire felt a constant unease, her days filled with a growing sense of dread. The whispers haunted her waking hours, a lingering echo that she couldn't shake. She would walk through her home, every creak and groan of the house sending shivers down her spine. Her once safe haven had become a prison of fear, and she was its captive. She tried to rationalize the sounds, blaming faulty pipes or noisy neighbors. She would listen intently, trying to convince herself that it was all in her head. But the whispers were too persistent, too real. She would peer through the blinds, hoping to catch a glimpse of something, anything that could explain the unexplainable. But there was nothing, just the oppressive silence of the night. But deep down, she knew the truth. The whispers were not the product of a faulty imagination or a creaky old house. They were real, and they were meant for her. Claire would sit in the dark, her mind racing, trying to piece together the fragments of her fear. She knew she couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was reaching out to her from the shadows. These whispers were meant for her. They carried a message, a sinister intent that she couldn't decipher. Claire's terror grew with each passing night, her mind teetering on the edge of sanity. She felt like a puppet, her strings pulled by an unseen force that reveled in her fear. The whispers were a constant reminder that she was not alone, that something malevolent was watching her. Then one night, everything changed. The whispers, which had always been a disjointed murmur, began to form words. Claire jolted awake, her heart racing, as the whispers coalesced into a chilling clarity. The room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with an oppressive presence. She could hear the creak of the door, the soft rustle of movement in the shadows. The whispers coalesced, forming words, her name. "Claire," they hissed, the sound slithering around her like icy fingers. It was a voice she didn't recognize, yet it felt disturbingly familiar. The way it wrapped around her name sent chills down her spine, a cold dread that settled deep in her bones. She could feel the presence drawing closer, its intent unmistakable. "Claire," they hissed, the sound slithering around her like icy fingers. She shivered uncontrollably, her body reacting to the malevolent force that seemed to envelop her. Goosebumps rose on her skin, a physical manifestation of the terror that gripped her. She clutched her blanket tightly, as if it could offer some protection against the unseen threat. Her name, uttered with a chilling familiarity, echoed through the room. It was as if the very walls were whispering, the sound bouncing off every surface, amplifying her fear. Claire looked around frantically, her eyes wide with terror, but there was no one there. Just the oppressive darkness and the echo of her name, a haunting reminder that she was not alone. It was no longer random noise. The whispers had a purpose, a sinister intent that was becoming clearer with each passing night. Claire listened intently, her mind racing to understand the message. Her eyes widened in realization, the truth dawning on her like a cold, harsh light. The whispers were not just sounds, they were a call, a beckoning from the darkness. Something, or someone, was calling to her from the darkness. The realization hit her like a tidal wave, overwhelming and inescapable. She could see a shadowy figure in the corner of her room, its presence undeniable. Claire's face contorted with terror, her mind struggling to comprehend the reality of her situation. The whispers had a name, and it was hers. She was no longer just a victim of the night, she was the target of something far more sinister. Terror, raw and consuming, seized Claire. Her breath hitched in her throat, her body trembled uncontrollably. The whispers, now a chorus, continued to call her name. Each utterance sent a fresh wave of fear washing over her. She wanted to scream, to run, but her voice was trapped in her throat, her limbs frozen in place. The room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with an unseen presence. Shadows danced in the corners of her vision. Her eyes darted around the room, desperately searching for the source of the whispers, for an explanation. But there was nothing, only the growing darkness and the chilling sound of her name. Panic welled up inside her. She fumbled for her phone, desperate to call for help, but the screen remained stubbornly dark. No signal. She was alone, cut off from the outside world. The whispers seemed to mock her desperation, growing louder, more insistent. She scrambled back on the bed, pulling the blankets over her head as if they could shield her from the unseen force. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic rhythm against the oppressive silence of the apartment. The whispers seemed to seep into her bones, chilling her from the inside out. The temperature in the room plummeted. Claire's breath formed icy clouds in the air. A bone-chilling cold settled deep in her marrow. The whispers seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once, surrounding her, taunting her. She squeezed her eyes shut, but the darkness offered no escape. She could feel the whispers, feel their icy breath against her skin. Then she felt it, a tug on her blanket, a soft, almost playful pull, as if something unseen was trying to get her attention. She held her breath, her entire body rigid with fear. The pull came again, stronger this time, dragging the blanket down towards the foot of the bed. Slowly, Claire forced her eyes open. The whispers seemed to intensify, swirling around the foot of her bed. And then, she saw it. A shape, forming out of the darkness. It was indistinct at first, a swirling mass of shadows and whispers. But as her eyes adjusted, it began to take on a more defined form. Terror choked her. She couldn't scream, she couldn't move, she could only watch, paralyzed by fear, as the shadowy figure solidified, taking on a chilling presence at the foot of her bed. It remained motionless, a silent sentinel, its form shifting and swirling in the dim light. The whispers ceased, leaving an unsettling silence that seemed to press down on the room. Claire's breath caught in her throat as she strained to hear any sound, any indication that she was not alone. The air felt thick, almost tangible, as if it were closing in around her. She could feel her heartbeat echoing in her ears, a frantic drumbeat that matched the rising panic in her chest. An eerie silence descended upon the room, broken only by the frantic beating of Claire's heart. Each thump seemed louder than the last, reverberating through the oppressive stillness. She could almost hear the blood rushing through her veins, a constant reminder of her vulnerability in the face of the unknown. The dim light cast long, sinister shadows that danced on the walls, creating an atmosphere of dread that was almost palpable. The shadowy figure remained at the foot of her bed, its features still obscured by darkness. It was as if the darkness itself had taken form, a living, breathing entity that watched her with unseen eyes. Claire's mind raced, trying to make sense of the apparition before her. Was it real, or just a figment of her imagination, conjured by the fear that gripped her so tightly? She dared not move, afraid that any sudden motion might provoke the figure into action. It seemed to study her, its presence both terrifying and strangely compelling. What did it want? Why was it here? These questions echoed in her mind, but no answers came. The figure's glowing eyes seemed to pierce through her, seeing into the depths of her soul. Claire felt exposed, vulnerable, as if every secret she had ever kept was laid bare before this enigmatic presence. The fear was almost overwhelming, but there was also a strange curiosity, a need to understand what she was facing. Questions swirled in Claire's mind, but she found no answers. Her thoughts were a chaotic jumble, each one more frantic than the last. She tried to focus, to calm herself, but it was no use. The fear was too great, the uncertainty too overwhelming. She felt as if she were drowning in a sea of her own anxiety, each wave pulling her further from the shore of rational thought. She needed to understand, to find some semblance of control in this nightmarish situation. She was trapped, caught in a web of fear and uncertainty, staring into the eyes of the unknown. The room seemed to close in around her, the walls pressing ever closer as if to suffocate her. Every shadow seemed to hide a new terror, every creak of the floorboards a harbinger of doom. Claire's eyes were wide with fear, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. She felt as if she were on the edge of a precipice, teetering on the brink of madness. The night stretched on, a terrifying tableau of fear and anticipation. Each minute felt like an eternity, the darkness seeming to stretch on forever. Claire's mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion, each thought more terrifying than the last. She could feel the weight of the night pressing down on her, a suffocating blanket of dread that threatened to smother her. The anticipation was almost worse than the fear itself, the waiting, the not knowing what would happen next. And as the first rays of dawn pierced through the darkness, the shadowy figure began to recede, melting back into the shadows from which it came. The light brought with it a sense of relief, a promise of safety that the night had denied her. Claire watched as the figure dissolved into the morning light, her fear slowly ebbing away with it. But the memory of the night remained, a haunting reminder of the terror she had faced. She knew that the dawn had brought only a temporary reprieve, and that the darkness would return. Leaving Claire alone with her fear, and the lingering echo of her name whispered in the darkness. The room was still, the silence almost deafening in its intensity. Claire sat alone, her mind replaying the events of the night over and over. The whispers, the shadowy figure, the fear that had gripped her so tightly, it all seemed like a distant nightmare, yet the fear was still very real. She knew that she would never forget this night, that the echoes of her fear would linger long after the dawn had come.